This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's 2 convenient Michigan locations where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint. You'll find aisles and aisles of scale model kits, RC models, model rockets, Warhammer gaming, and railroading products. Stop in at Ryder's today and tell them Doug sent you. This review covers the F-4EJ Phantom II, and it's a 1/72nd scale kit from HASG, number 00331. Now, the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom was an American tandem 2-seat twin-engine all-weather long-range supersonic jet. It was used as an interceptor, a fighter bomber, and reconnaissance, originally developed by McDonnell for the Navy in 1961. Now, production ran from 58 to 81 with a total of almost 5,200 aircraft. Now, the Phantom has a top speed of over Mach 2.2, and it can carry 18,000 pounds of weapons on 9 external hardpoints. In 1968, the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force purchased about 140 of the F-4EJs, and they used them for various missions, including reconnaissance. Now, operations continued there until 2021. The Hasegawa kit was introduced in '72, and it's had many reboxings, usually with new decals and some new parts along the way. The most recent one was 2 reboxings with new decals just this year in 2022. Now, the kit that we'll be building is the first of 7 reboxings with new decals that was released back in 2008. There's 69 pieces molded in gray and clear, and when the kit is finished, it's about 10 1/4 inches long, 6 3/4 inches wide, and 2 3/4 inches high. And I hear Newt behind the divider there. He's our program director. He's got something he wants to add here. Come on in, Newt.
You don't review too many military planes, so this one was a good choice.
Thanks, Newt. We'll try to include more of these in the future, too. Here are the contents of the kit. As you can see, it's pretty basic, nice clean kit with a lot of molded in detail for a smaller kit. And of course, a nice clear canopy there and some really good decals that have good registry. Now remember, we'll be using probably liquid cement for most things, sometimes super glue, and even clear glue for the glass part. But always heed the manufacturer's use and safety guidelines when you use any of the products that you hear or see used in the review. Construction starts with the cockpit and the pilots, and you can remove those with some good sprue cutters and clean them up with some sanding sticks, etc. And we're going to be using I used Tamiya paints and a fine brush, and I painted the cockpit and the seats black and gray. Now, I also painted the inside of the fuselage with some gray, and the crew was orange, white, brown, black, and flesh tones. The detail in the figures was not real prominent, so you just try to make them look the part. I dry brushed some of the panels to bring out some detail, but found that little can be seen through the canopy. Now, with the cockpit drying, we can start working on the fuselage halves in part AB and glue the instrument panels to their locating points on one side of the fuselage, then sandwich the cockpit between the fuselage halves and glue and clamp it. The fit is actually quite good. Now, when the glue dries, remove the clamps and lightly sand the seam, but try not to destroy any of the raised detail. Paint the cockpit interior areas of the fuselage using a brush and let it dry so the canopy can be placed in for the next step. Now gather the wings, intakes, the canopy, air brake, and elevators, and remove the sprue attachment parts and clean it up. Glue the air brake to the top of the fuselage, and then the top wing halves to the lower wing half, and glue that to the fuselage. Now notice the wing root, it's a pretty good fit. Also notice the good fit of the air brake on top of the fuselage. Now glue the intake halves together and glue them to the fuselage. The fit there was also very good. After test fitting, glue the canopy into place. The fit was okay, with some light sanding, elevated, some of the small gaps there. Now the fit of the elevators is the hardest and probably the most important so far. They need to be 23 degrees down from the horizontal to be accurate. Now you can make a jig for this, but I found the actual measurement to be less important to me, and I made sure that one side was not different from the other using the wing as a guide. It was a good fit. No filler and just a little sanding would be necessary. So I plan to hang the plane from the ceiling in takeoff position so no one would be able to look at the proper degree in a contest model anyway, but keep that in mind if you're building one. Now locate these parts from the kit, clean up the nozzles, the arrestor hook, landing gear, wheels, and the gear bay covers, and then before turning the plane over, place some masking tape on the center of the canopy to prevent it from getting marred up or scratched. Now glue the landing gear struts into the gear bays. There's some good attachment points there, so make sure the gear is straight and true to the aircraft. And you may need to use a little adjustment there. So the oleo on the front of the front strut needs to be placed at an angle toward the left of the aircraft. Now glue the bay doors into place. You may need to do some test fitting there to see how the rear bay doors fit it, and they don't really have positive placement points, so check that out. Now use these photos to help, and finally glue on the hook and the nozzles, and I left the wheels off for now to make painting easier. Gather up the pitot tube, the missiles, drop tanks, hard points, and get them ready to assemble. And I drilled out the rear of the missiles to add some detail, and I used the hollow end of them with some toothpicks for painting, so it helps there. And glue the center of the drop tanks halves together, and then sand the glue seam smooth while keeping a cylindrical shape, and then do the same for the other drop tanks. Glue the outer drop tanks to the hard points, and then the center tank to the fuselage, and the outer tanks to the hard points on the wings. I'll glue the missiles to the fuselage after I paint the frame there, and the pitot tube would be glued on last so it won't get broken during painting. I used some Microsol liquid mask on the canopy and gave the entire model a coat of Stynylrez gray primer with an airbrush. After the primer had dried, I coated the underside of the aircraft, including the drop tanks and the missiles, with some XF2 flat white paint, and after the paint had dried, I masked off the underside of the aircraft to paint the next color. Using an airbrush, I gave the top of the plane a couple coats of Model Master's light ghost gray, and after that had dried, I masked off the front and painted the nose with some XF18 black. With the tail still masked off, I started to do a little detailing by painting the underside of the elevators and the tail section with some X32 titanium silver. I removed the masks. All went well except for the nose, where the Model Master paint came off in one spot, and the canopy masks took all of the Model Master's paint with it. So I'll try to use Tamiya paints, but things are tight there, so I'm using some older paints I had, and that's part of the issue. After the titanium paint had dried, I streaked with some light hints of X23 clear blue for heat marks. Then I painted the jet nozzles X56 metallic gray, and with a fine brush I painted the wheels XF16 flat aluminum and the tires XF85 rubber black. Now glue the wheels and the tires to the landing gear. And here's a tip: when you're building an older model, sometimes the decals, sometimes they're aged and they need to be tested. So I cut this one, which was part of the decal sheet, into 4 pieces and applied them to the test model. I found them to be good, fine, with a very thin carrier, but Salvaset destroyed the decal, but Microset and Microsol worked perfectly on them. So just using some water left a slight silvering, and that disappeared after clear coat. So in many cases, the Microsol products, scale products, seem to work a little better on these older decals. So then on the wing root there, you can see I hand painted the section XF66 light gray and let that dry. And then after placing the decals and remasking the canopy, I gave the entire model a coat of Mission Models MMA 005 semi-gloss clear paint. After the clear coat had dried, I used some Tamiya black panel line wash to accent panel lines and make some streaks in appropriate areas and a little grime here and there. I left the chip in the front and included this in the weathering. And I also add some streaking under the plane and left it kind of light as these were never really used in combat. And after the wash, I was dry, I gave it another coat of semi-gloss clear. Then finally, I removed the canopy mask and hand painted the canopy frame with some Model Masters light gray Ghost and a fine red sable brush. Finally, glue the pitot tube into place and then paint it black and titanium. Well, there you have it. This model is finished, and it was a fine addition to the Japanese Air Force and was a workhorse for decades. And you can display this proudly on your shelf. It's got some fine markings, and for a small and older kit, it was actually pretty nicely detailed. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you liked this step-by-step premium model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.